With that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Stuart Phillips. His title is Dietary Protein and Weight Loss Advantage Protein. He is a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Skeletal Muscle Health. He is also the inaugural director of the McMaster Center for Nutrition, Exercise, and Health Research and the Physical Activity Center of Excellence. His research is focused on the impact of nutrition and exercise on human protein turnover, specifically in skeletal muscle. He is dedicated to understanding how exercise and dietary protein impact body composition, strength, and function in aging. And his research is funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, the National Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada, the Canadian Diabetes Association, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. Dr. Phillips is a fellow of both the American College of Sports Medicine and the American College of Nutrition, and we're happy to have him here as he really is one of the world's experts in protein nutrition. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Blake. Thank you really for the invitation to come down to Galveston. This town was a huge part of my professional upbringing and mentorship under Dr. Bob Wolf right over here at the Shriners Hospital, and spent time running across to the General Clinical Research Center. And my memories are very fond of this place. And so every time I come back, I made the limo driver drive past my old apartment last night, and hanging out on the Strand was a good time. It's very, very fond memories. So it's wonderful to be back here. So when we talk about weight loss, I think one of my sort of opening rider statements is, first of all, that I really don't do the work. And these are the people that are back in the lab, and they're the ones that are churning out the data, and I get to stand on some very industrious shoulders and bask in their reflected glory, so to speak. But the thesis I want to put out to you, and one of the points I want to make, is that protein is probably the most important macronutrient in weight loss. And it's actually wonderful to be able to speak on a program after Dr. Heather Leidy and listen to her work, because it really does set up a lot of what I'm about to tell you. One of the things that I want to make pretty clear before we start is that there are a number of values that are sort of thrown around, and if you like, people like to fixate on the protein RDA, the recommended dietary allowance. And I probably wouldn't have an issue if the RDA were called something like the minimal dietary intake, because RDA as recommended dietary allowance means, A, it's what's recommended, and really it's all you're allowed to have. And so by that standard, and if that's the yardstick by which we measure protein intake of people, then a lot of people are consuming above the RDA. So therefore, they're getting all that they need. And it took me about an hour on the phone with a New York Times reporter yesterday to explain that that was the wrong yardstick. I think she understood in the end, but stay tuned. Whenever you spend an hour on the phone with somebody, particularly from the newspaper, you can find that they can say just about anything they want about something you've said. So I'm sure I'll be misquoted. So these are the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. And really, when you look at the Institute of Medicine document, what it says is these are the ranges of intakes of particular energy sources that are associated with reduced risk for chronic disease and providing adequate intakes of essential nutrients. And you can see from 10 to 35% of your energy can come from protein. So yesterday I got asked, it must have been about probably about 10 times by this reporter, well, what's the upper end? And I said, it's defined by the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. Well, how much is that? I said, it's 35% of your energy intake. Well, how much is that? And I'm like, well, you can do the math for you if you want, but it's a lot of protein, and it's a lot more than the RDA. So just to be clear, and exactly as Dr. Leidy said this morning, all of the studies that I'm going to show you this afternoon will have had subjects consuming protein well within this range. And actually, most of them not really getting too much closer to about 30% at the highest point. So I need to give you a public service announcement first, and it's sort of been a little bit of a mission of mine, and you'll forgive me. I'm going to soapbox for a little bit here. That's okay. Kelly soapboxed this morning, so she set the tone. And that's this, is that, you know, we're told, or I hear, or a lot of people say, high dietary protein causes kidney and liver problems. I'm not sure how the liver fits in there, but it's a brown internal organ, and, you know, but let's just say that, you know, this is the sort of rider statement here. There's no data. There's no data that link the two. None. Not a scrap. Okay? And don't take my report for it. The FAO, the WHO, and the Institute of Medicine say the same things. This is their direct quote. I'm not, you know, plagiarizing it in any sort of, or I say altering it. I am plagiarizing it. The protein content of the diet is not related to progressive decline in kidney function with age. Here's the WHO. Which is, you can tell that somebody from the other side of the Atlantic wrote this. The suggestion that the decline of glomerular filtration rate that occurs with advancing age in healthy subjects can be attenuated by reducing the protein in the diet has no foundation. That's a British person's way of saying there's no link between protein and the decline in kidney function. Okay? We have a lot of them up in Canada, so this is how they speak. And so it's flawed circular logic to say that these two things, one causes the other. And it really comes from this observation. People with chronic kidney disease and in renal failure are put on a low-protein diet. And there's no doubt that it prolongs survival in these individuals, but it's simply wrong to make the therefore statement that higher protein diets cause renal disease. So people need to stop saying that because it's wrong. It's incorrect. And for years, I wrote letters to textbooks that I would give to my undergraduate students, and I would say, you have to stop saying this. It's wrong. I got a reply, I think, from about 1 in 13 letters, so I gave up on that. So now it's my soapbox time. Just stop saying that, okay? And I'm not going to say any more. So why protein? Why would we talk about protein as one macronutrient as opposed to another? First of all, you heard a brilliant presentation from Heather this morning on satiety. There's an enhanced thermic effect. It's not big, but it might be significant. It's a very poor substrate for lipogenesis. You simply can't really overconsume, and Marie touched on this with some work that Joey Antonio's done in very high-protein diets, and I'll admit, very active young men, but they simply do not gain fat when you overfeed them energy as protein. So it doesn't get turned into fat, not very effectively anyway. And one of the key points that I'm going to make in this presentation is that higher protein intakes help preserve muscle mass and may increase fat mass loss, particularly in the face of an energy deficit. And it's possible, particularly through nutrient-dense sources of protein like meats, dairy, eggs, that sort of thing, that you can improve the nutrient density of the diet. And there are a couple of, I think, absolutely outstanding reviews. The one on the bottom is a little bit shady. The first author is a little shaky. But appearing in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition as a supplement dealing with these topics. And they're free and open online access, both of them. And I'd encourage you to go to take a look. This is a sort of an interesting figure, but it outlines a protein leverage hypothesis. And what this hypothesis basically says, and it's been tested in a number of different species, all the way up to humans, is that when you begin to lower the protein content of the diet of individuals, they begin to seek out energy in order to compensate for a low-protein diet. It works in crickets, grasshoppers, mice, rats, that sort of thing. And it works in humans, but maybe doesn't work quite as effectively at the higher protein intakes. But nonetheless, it appears that that leverage point that you can see here, which is sort of indicated by this inflection point here, if I got the pointer right. Oh, no, there we go. This point here at around sort of 14 to 15%. Once you drop below that, people just begin to consume more and more carbohydrates and fat or energy in an attempt to get the protein back in their diet. So this is a hypothesis, but it's not a hypothesis without a little bit of data in humans. So what this shows right here, these are a number of studies that have been done, mostly by an Australian group, and really there's two ways of modeling this change in caloric intake. It'll show you that as protein intake goes up, that energy intake goes down spontaneously and then actually inflects at some point. So beyond a certain intake in terms of protein, probably at about 20% energy, people, they become inflexible in terms of this signal, Maybe it's related to some of the things that Heather presented this morning around satiety signals. I'm not really sure, but it's an interesting idea, and maybe one of the reasons why protein as a macronutrient might be a viable alternative in weight loss. I'm not going to cherry pick, and I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm standing up here as somebody who receives USDA funding, which was painfully pointed out to me by the New York Times reporter yesterday. And so therefore, I'm tarred by the industry or commodity board brush, but I'm going to give you an evidence-based answer. And you can't come from McMaster University, which considers itself the home of evidence-based medicine. And so I'm going to talk about meta-analyses. And meta-analyses are compendiums of studies that look at the sum total effect of as many randomized clinical trials that are out there as possible. So here are three. It's just an example, and I'm not going to cherry pick the best one, but I'm going to show you one that gives a representative answer, and it's from Tom Wycherley. So this is a group down in Australia. But it's important to remember in terms of weight loss that we lose more than just fat. It's great to be on the Biggest Loser and to hop on the scale and somebody says, oh, you're down 85 pounds. That's not so good if it's 85 pounds of muscle that you've just lost, because then you've lost metabolically active tissue that you're probably going to need later in life to help you get around. And in fact, it's probably true to say that fat mass loss accounts on average for about 70% of the weight we lose, 70 to 75%, depending on the diet. Bone loss can go down or can go up as well, particularly if you're on a low calcium intake during the weight loss period. But skeletal muscle can comprise anywhere from as little as actually nothing to as much as 30%. So I'm going to show you, this is a meta-analysis coming out of Wayne Campbell at Purdue. And what he shows you here is that the weight loss is fat-free mass, which is shown on this graph. And it really is at around, I think that's sort of mid-20s% in terms of the relative percentage of weight that you've lost is lost as muscle. The main point, and Marie made this in her talk, is that from metabolically active tissue standpoint, you're giving up a tissue that is burning a little bit more energy than fat. It's also the tissue that as you get a little bit older, you'd really like to hang on to. And if you're an athlete, it's the tissue I think you care about the most. So in this meta-analysis, what they did was they looked at standard protein, low-fat diets versus energy-restricted higher. I think that's the word they wanted to use, not high. I don't know what high means, but it means higher than the average, if you like. So in one intervention, they had to compare two different diets, and it had to be done in a randomized fashion to appear in this meta-analysis. So this is what these figures look like from these types of analyses. And they basically, this is called a forest plot. And it's basically looking at all of the studies and giving you an overall, with the diamond down here, aggregate effect of everything that's being done in the literature so far that fits the criteria. So what I want to show you here is that in terms of weight loss, which is what this figure shows, there's an overall effect that favors high protein. In other words, people on a higher protein diet lose more body weight than do people on a lower or standard, if you like, protein diet. All of these studies have protein intakes within the AMDR. When we look at this figure here shows you changes in fat mass, you can see that it favors high protein as well. So the weight that you lose is comprised of actually a greater percentage of fat if you're on a higher protein diet. At the same time, this is fat-free mass or skeletal muscle, and you can see that what it does is it allows you to spare or hang on to muscle mass. So in other words, you get a favored high protein, but in a positive direction here. So the diamond shifted to the right. It means you retain more muscle. So you lose more body weight, more of it is fat, and you lose less muscle. All good messages, in my opinion. This is an interesting meta-analysis, again, coming from Wayne Campbell's group, but it's really an update of the same meta-analysis that you saw the Wycherley group undertake, but it's looking at older adults. So given the demographic shifts in our population, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, everybody's getting older. So this is important data. What you can see here is that this is the confidence interval, and this is the protein intake on energy restriction changes in lean mass, there's really not a lot of difference. A little bit of difference here that tends to favor higher protein. That's a good message for an older person who's already losing muscle mass as a result of age-related sarcopenia, which Dr. Patton-Jones will chat with you about after my talk here. There's not an awful lot of changes in fat mass, but that's not as important, I don't think, for an older person. It's important not to lose lean mass when you're energy restricted. So I think that those are some pretty salient take-home messages. The main point that I would make here too is that nutrient-dense sources of protein are going to be important in weight loss, particularly for older people. And you have to think of it in terms of if you're an older person on a limited energy budget and you're in a weight loss situation, you still need to get all of the other nutrients, the iron, the zinc, the B12, the calcium, the vitamin D, etc. And you can't, it's very difficult to do that on a limited energy budget, particularly as an older person, if you don't include some form of animal protein. So dairy source proteins, high quality, nutrient dense, and there may be other benefits. I'm going to talk to you about dairy because that's one of the funding sources of the work that we've done. This is a study that Andrea Joss, it's the young lady pictured up at the right here, did when she was working in my group. And what we did in this group was, study, was we took younger women and we had them, they were active. They were lifting weights 5 days a week for 12 weeks, and they were consuming an extra either 500 milliliters of skimmed milk after they worked out, or the same amount of energy simply as sugar and water, so a control or placebo, if you like. Everybody in the study gains lean mass, and this is I'm showing you the individual as well as group data here, but the milk drinkers gained a little bit more. I think what's impressive in this study is not that the lean mass gains were maybe a little bit greater in the milk consumption group, but the fat mass losses were significant only in the milk drinkers. Now, this is not in an energy-restricted situation. So when you look at these two things together, in the milk group, you saw muscle mass gain and fat mass loss such that the net change in their body weight was about 200 grams, which is beyond the limits of detection. Whereas the control group gained muscle and lost almost no fat, and so net went up about 1 kilo or about 2 pounds. The change in body composition is impressive in this sense, but more important to me is its potential application in situations where people are looking to preserve lean mass and would like to lose as much as possible fat mass. But remember, this is not in a calorically restricted situation. So those results prompted us to propose what we call the IDEAL trial, improving diet, exercise, and lifestyle. Again, Andrea ran this trial. And the ethos of this trial was to combine higher dairy, exercise in the form of aerobic and resistive. For a lot of the women in this trial, it was the first time in their entire lives that they had lifted a weight. And really try and manipulate not just the intake and the servings of dairy, but the intake of total protein as well. So we had 3 different groups. The figures you see here represent the proportion of energy coming from carbohydrates, fats, and protein. This is a low dairy consuming group. These women are exceptionally easy to find on a college campus. It's about 80% of them out there consume 1 serving of dairy per day or less. If we'd included women that are low dairy consumers and that are low meat consumers, we easily could have found them as well. So in one group, what we did was we took them from a low dairy intake and we gave them 3 serves of dairy per day, which is the current MyPlate recommendation, similar to Canada's Food Guide, not entirely. But it brought up, obviously, their calcium intake, but we preserved the macronutrient distribution. In this group, we gave them 6 serves of dairy per day. Obviously, a much higher calcium intake, but we took away from the carbohydrate and we gave to the protein, and so now they're consuming 30% of their energy as protein, the majority of it coming from a dairy source. What I want to make clear is that these women were all calorically restricted for 16 weeks, about 750 calories per day. Now, if you've ever been on a weight loss diet, what you'll know is most people get miserable after a while. I can tell you anecdotally that this group got very miserable. I saw them at the beginning and the end. We did some other analyses where we took blood samples and muscle biopsies and fat biopsies. And for some reason, I remember after the blinding, I said, what group were they in? They're like, oh, they're in this group. I'm like, yeah, figures. Yeah. I'll tell you another anecdotal finding, okay? We screened 138 women for this trial to find 90, and 85% of them reported that they were lactose intolerant. So we took them to our gastroenterology lab. We had them do a hydrogen breath test with lactose. How many were lactose intolerant by clinical diagnostic standards? 5? 5%. 5%? I say 5 would have been closer. 2. You hear that? Didn't get it in the paper. Reviewer didn't like that, clearly, but that's the message. 2 out of 138 reported, and 85% reporting, I'm lactose intolerant. That's why I don't drink dairy. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. We're going to send you for this test. It'll just tell, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. You're not. You're in the high dairy. No, we didn't say that, but they get randomized to the high dairy group. They're like, I don't know if I can do this. They were fine. So the study objective was to determine the effects of diets that were high or moderate in dietary protein as dairy. So obviously calcium and vitamin D came along with this on fat mass loss and lean mass retention. That's the money shot if you were on The Biggest Loser. It would just be your weight loss across 16 weeks in kilograms. And disappointingly, they're all the same. There's no statistically significant difference. There are the groups. There are the means. I haven't given you the errors in there. It really doesn't matter. The bottom line is no difference. That would be the walk-away point for The Biggest Loser, but the important point to us was obviously the body composition of these individuals. The changes in fat mass were very similar in the first 8 weeks. The only group that continued to lose body fat and at a more rapid rate in the subsequent 8 weeks was the higher dairy, higher protein group. So you guys can do quick math. I know that means that if fat mass went down more and total mass stayed the same, then something had to happen in lean mass. There's the swing. And indeed, interestingly enough, in the first 8 and the last 8 weeks, the only group that gained, remember they were all exercising and lifting weights for the first time, that gained muscle was the high protein, high dairy group. So in this situation, you can see that this nutrient-dense source of protein in the form of dairy was able to support lean mass gain in the face of an energy deficit. So achieving what Marie said is oftentimes the goal of a lot of athletes, which is fat mass loss and lean mass gain. So it's possible. These were overweight to obese premenopausal women. There's the swing, about 1.4 kilos. It's a big difference. Not to, again, show you my study, even though it's the best, this is a meta-analysis showing how dairy intake enhances body weight and composition changes during energy restriction. And what you can see, again, this is the most recent, in 2016, is that, and I apologize for the quality of the figure, that's the best I could do, is not a huge difference, but it does favor high dairy. So in other words, you lose more body weight in the same trends, you lose more body fat, and you tend to, although it's not significant, preserve lean mass. There's the effects on body fat, and there's the effects on lean mass. Because the diamond, actually, you can't really see it, maybe you can, touches the 0 here, by all strict meta-analytic rules and P not less than 0.05, you can't say that there's a difference there, but I don't know about you, it looks like a difference to me. But that was non-evidence-based, just to be clear. So during weight loss, higher dairy protein resulted in greater fat mass loss and lean mass gain when combined, particularly with exercise. So the interesting part would be, what if we could apply something like this to older people? Wouldn't this be a great avenue to say to somebody who's a little bit older, you know what, it's important for you to lose some weight. But it's a little bit controversial among geriatricians right now as to whether you should tell an older person to lose weight, because with weight loss, they're going to lose a bit of muscle. And we don't want them to lose that because they're already on the downslope a little bit. They're already losing lean mass. So I'm going to show you, I just need to do a quick biochemistry lesson about how muscle mass is regulated. And maybe some of you have seen these curves before, but there are fluctuations in protein synthesis and protein breakdown within a muscle in a small period of time. Sorry if I'm stealing some of your thunder, Doug. Sorry, buddy. Didn't I say I wouldn't show this stuff? Sorry, man. Okay. Forgiveness, permission, what are you going to do? I got up here first. So every time you eat protein, you stimulate the synthesis of new muscle proteins. You suppress breakdown a little bit, and the green area shows you that there's a little bit of a net gain in muscle mass, but then it's lost when you don't eat. And then you gain it, then you lose it, then you gain it, then you lose it, and so on and so forth. Now, if you have somebody exercise, then all of these periods in which you eat improve in terms of net retention, and the loss is a little bit less. Not rocket science. You can see here, add up the green areas, subtract the gray areas, and you're going to gain incrementally small amounts of muscle as you go through the period of time in which you're exercising and consuming more dietary protein. Meal spacing, however, is going to be important, and I'll just show you something here. These are some data from Keelan Murphy, recently graduated PhD student from my lab, and what she's done here is that she's balanced or skewed the protein intake. And it appears that when you balance the protein intake amongst the 3 meals per day, you get a better outcome. The outcome in this study was only protein synthesis, and I'll get you to focus on the fed graph down the bottom here. This is myofibrillar. These are the force-generating contractile proteins within muscle. And in the energy-restricted state, when you space your meals out, you do a little bit better. When you add exercise to that, which is this condition out here, it's this energy restriction plus resistance training, you do a little bit better again. So if you're an older person, this meal spacing appears to make a little bit of difference. So it helps to maintain muscle protein synthesis. We think over the long run it would help to maintain muscle mass. I think there's some data coming on this. But the important point I want to mention is that when you combine it, particularly with exercise, is you do tend to see an enhanced or synergistic effect such that actually you don't look like you're in energy deficit at all. So it would be a strategy for older people to maintain their lean mass. I'll just quickly show you these data, which was an NCVA-sponsored study carried out. And the interesting point here is that after 6 months of these are overweight, older women who are consuming beef and trying to spread it out across 3 meals per day, is that their physical function in the protein-consuming group here is actually improved to a greater degree than those in the control group. So there's something called an SPPB. It's a short physical performance battery, and it's sort of like the acid test to see how an older person is doing. And so these data, I think, are kind of interesting. And this is obviously a nutrient-dense source of protein that's being added to the diet to try and match meal spacing across the day in older people. And it's associated with a beneficial functional outcome here. Chair stands, if you don't think that's important, sit down in the chair and try and stand up from it without pushing off. If you can't do that and you're an older person, then you're in full-time institutionalized care because you're stuck on the toilet. Not too many toilets have the armrests. Some do, special ones. So meal spacing during weight loss and energy deficit in older overweight persons is effective at enhancing short physical performance battery function. What about weight regain? This is the biggest loser part of the story. We all know now through the press, and we've seen the data published on the winners of the Biggest Loser, that they've gained back the weight. And we know that the rate of recidivism of weight loss is ridiculously poor. If it were a drug, it would never make it to market. So does protein have an impact on weight regain? The answer is yes, but it's small. So this is a meta-analytic look at body weight regain, showing you that you're able, with higher protein, this is at the expense of carbohydrate, to keep that weight off for a little bit longer. It's a little bit more impressive, obviously, in short-term versus long-term outcomes, but the effect's there. Maybe it's mediated through satiety. Nobody's really sure. This is showing you the same effect, and this is on fat mass. It's not a big effect, but it is significant. The higher protein helps you keep off the fat mass that you've lost. What if you're pushed to an extreme? And I just want to show you these data only to brag a little bit, because it was an extraordinarily difficult study to do, and I want to acknowledge the student that did it. But to show you that the holy grail, as it was so named in the press, of weight loss is possible. And that's to get in a gym. Marie hears it all the time, I'm sure. Get in the gym and I want to lose the fat, but I want to get bigger at the same time. It happens, but you got to do it right. So we had higher compared with lower protein. That was 1.2 versus 2.4 during a severe energy deficit, 40% energy restriction for 4 weeks. That didn't have the intended effect. Cut back your energy intake by 40% for 4 weeks. Ooh, yeah, okay, I know. It's right after lunch. I'm like, what's he talking about? You're hungry all the time. In fact, at the end of 4 weeks, all these young guys can talk about is food. They can't. You can try and engage them in a conversation about sports. Nothing. They're like, yeah, I'm just thinking about what I'm going to eat. I'm like, okay, good. And when I'm going to eat it. I'm like, yeah, good. What did you eat for breakfast? It's nonstop. So young men, 20 per group, 40% reduction in energy intake for 28 days, and they exercise 6 days a week. It's still not sinking in. This is hard work, man. So we had them on 1.2 versus 2.4. We timed specifically their protein intake for post-exercise. Carbohydrate, we clamped it at 3 grams per kilo per day. Important, as Marie said, because of performance. So this is it is a lower carbohydrate diet, but it's not low to the sense that these guys are pushed into a state of ketosis, because I don't think you can sustain the type of performance that we put these guys under 6 days a week. 85% of the difference in the protein intake that they have came from a whey protein containing milkshake. The blinding was extraordinary. In other words, they did not know which group that they were in. In other words, there was a small percentage of the difference in protein intake that was from their diets. But let's face it, these are young men, and they really can't tell the difference, right? You can show them a cell phone, right, Marie, and they understand. But outside of that, they don't really know what they're talking about. But you give them a whey protein shake, and some of it had less whey protein, and some of it had more whey protein, and they couldn't tell the difference. So it was effective. 55% guessed their group assignment correctly. Well, that's slightly better than chance, but that's what you get when you just do 40 tests. This is the composition of the study drinks. So you can see that they had either 50 or 15 grams of protein, similar amounts of carbohydrate, obviously much more fat. To give the game away, the control group had their milkshake made up in full-fat milk or skim milk. So obviously similar, but not perfectly matched energy contents, but these guys couldn't tell the difference. That's the grad student in question. He's now making a lot more money doing something else. Smart man. And that's Tom Longland. He's the real hard worker behind all of this stuff. I don't like to show tables, but I do want to show you a couple of things in this table. This is the only way I could sort of get it out here. First of all, there were no performance differences between the groups. So it didn't bear itself out in terms of what these guys could do afterwards. The really important point I want to come down here, this is creatinine clearance and estimated glomerular filtration rate. And that's kidney function. And we've got 1.2 versus 2.4, no difference. 4 weeks, I'll grant you, not very long period of time, but nothing happening to kidney function. Stay tuned on that. I thought Dr. Teresa Davis was going to be here, Blake, so I was going to plug our in-review manuscript at Journal of Nutrition. You might see some more data on that soon, but stay tuned. There's the money shot for you. Body mass changes over here, no difference between the two. Fat mass changes over here, much greater for the high protein containing group. Okay, remember this is in 4 weeks. This is as much as the women in the previous study lost in 16 weeks. So you've got 4.5, almost 5 kilos of fat being lost in 28 days. At the same time, the high protein group gained lean body mass. So yeah, fat mass loss, lean mass gain is possible, but you have to be very judicious about how you do it. So Protein, I think, is essentially important nutrient in weight loss for all of the reasons that you've heard about previously, but not only that, it preserves lean mass, which I think is important. More protein from nutrient-dense sources, and I firmly believe this, is going to help maintain lean body mass during weight loss. Meal spacing of protein may be more important, but we definitely need more data from chronic long-term studies. At least some of the observational data that's out there from N. Haynes sources, and we've been involved with a fellow named Jeremy Lonicki at the University of Mississippi looking at this, and there is actually data to suggest the more people get that 30 to 40 grams served per day, the more able they are to hang on to their muscle mass, and it's associated with strength. So there's a functional outcome. Simultaneous fat mass loss and lean mass gain is possible, but you got to work hard. 6 days a week, a 40% energy deficit. And I was asked, somebody, fairly sharp reporter said, so would you have done that protocol? I'm thinking to myself, tell the truth. And I'm like, no, honestly, I wouldn't. And he said, so what's it about? I said, it's a proof of principle. It can happen. He said, so theoretically? I said, no, actually it happened. But yes, it's a good theory, isn't it? The point would be is to make it realistic, what we need to do is to make the energy deficit smaller and have the period be longer and hopefully have the changes be sustained. That'd be the Holy Grail. Thank you very much.
For the Holy Grail study?
Yeah, the Holy Grail. I didn't give it that name, so just to disclaimer, not my nomenclature, just for
What was the exercise protocol like?
Oh yeah, you know what? If you send me an email, I'll be happy to send you that. So it was a series of actually some pretty high intensity, what we call HIIT type workouts on a bike, and then it was a lot of resistance exercise as well. So very much sort of lean mass promoting exercises. Both groups, I mean, it's an extraordinarily grueling exercise protocol. The idea was, though, if you want to put this into a scenario, I think where it fits the best is we call it a readiness protocol. So if you take somebody who's a little bit overweight, out of shape, how quickly can you get them into shape to serve in the military, to be a firefighter, a police officer, something like that? I know that, the majority of the sort of inquiries I got in follow-up of like, tell me exactly what you did, were from people in armed services or law enforcement afterwards. So, yeah, I think but 40% energy deficit, it really, yeah. And we gave them everything they had to eat. So we provided their diets for 28 days, and I think that really enhanced the compliance. But they're just hangry. Is that the word? Yeah, hangry. I didn't think that was the first time I heard that. Heather used, she said, "This guy's hangry." That guy you saw there, they were like that from about day 10 onwards. I was the least popular guy in the university when we were carrying that one out.
This is simple. You kept saying older people.
Older. Oh,
Could you define what you mean by older people?
The latest initiative of which I'm part of at our university is called the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging. And I think it's fair to say that we've got to stop saying that people over the age of 65 are old. Because now people are living, yes, applause, because now people are living for 30 years beyond that. So you're not really old at 60, it's not the age. But I do think, and I'm going to hang this one, so I'm going to throw you under the bus, Doug. Doug will more closely and carefully define what aging is, but when you look at where muscle mass loss starts, I'm pretty sure it starts in your 4th or your 5th decade. I'm not saying that's old, because then I'd be offending myself, frankly. But the main point is, you're not old at 65. Chronological and biological age are very different, though. We can find 65 and 70-year-olds that look like a 30-year-old who does no exercise and has a desk job, metabolically. Chronologically, they're very different. But muscle mass, function, everything, they look pretty much the same. So we got to be prepared for people to work into their 70s. That's just the way it's going.
So could you kind of address quality of protein? Because are we getting this high level of protein just to get certain amino acids, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, the protein quality issue is a hard one to address because there haven't been enough good studies that really have compared a lower versus a higher quality protein. I think going along with what Heather said, when it comes to total protein, it probably matters a little bit less rather than the quality of the proteins. Now, if you put someone in an extremely stressed state, like we did in our weight loss study, or if you have someone in an intensive care unit, or if you have someone going through surgery or something, which is extraordinarily stressful, then I think the quality begins to matter. And there are probably, and again, I'm not going to steal Dr. Patton-Jones's thunder here, some amino acids that are more pertinent than others. And so in those situations, I think, and in people with chronic kidney disease, I mean, if you're feeding them a low-protein diet, to my mind, it should be the highest quality protein available. I like the nutrient-dense concept only because as a package, it brings along all the other things that you need anyway, which you have to get in your diet. So if you're 75 and, you know, you're living by yourself and your husband just passed away, and not to use that as a gloomy scenario, but it's a typical one, and you're thinking, you know, your drive to cook, everything else, your appetite is down, you should be getting nutrient-dense sources of protein. You shouldn't be getting most of your calories from carbohydrates. That's where the real sharp downturn begins to happen.
Just a real quick question. With the study that you're talking about with the 40% deficit for short term, and I'm guessing you probably didn't
I believe
track.
it was called the Holy Grail study.
That's right, the Holy Grail. Did you track weight regain? And before you answer that, my question is I'm wondering if for people it is harder for them to stay on an energy deficit. And so it'd be a great take-home message to say, get on an energy restriction, high protein diet on the, over the short term. And then with weight maintenance, maybe you actually gain less, you have less weight regain when you're doing it in that context.
Right. So I think I'll answer your question in two ways. First of all, we didn't track weight regain. So that's my rider. But I can tell you from certain sports and coaches and people who counsel athletes at a pretty high level, what they do is they dive athletes for about 2 to 3 weeks at a time, then they level them off because it's mentally fatiguing to be able to be restricting food. So they level them off and then they dive them again. They don't try and just drive them down for an extended period of time. So it's a bit of a psychological break. And I think you would probably know better than I to talk about whether people are more able to sustain weight loss that is slow and gradual, which I think has sort of been debunked by David Allison and that group. And the point being is that some people actually look at their sharp dive and they're motivated by it to continue to strive and to keep that weight off. But I do think that there's merit to sort of coming down and maybe leveling off for a period and then trying for a little bit. But our dive was like that. And I just think that we did it in a short enough period of time that we could, frankly, afford to provide food for that many guys for that long a period of time, mostly as flash frozen meals. And if I had a choice to do it again, I'd probably do it at about 20% and try and push them for longer and see at what point they sort of cracked, so to speak, because most of the readiness protocols last at least 12 weeks. That's what the police training academy is, at least in my province. I think when you talk to people who sort of really get deep into this stuff, they will tell you that for some people, the extreme weight loss right at the beginning is actually a highly motivating factor. For other people, they hate it. They absolutely hate it. And so I think it's very individual specific. And, I mean, my disclaimer again on all of this is that weight loss is not easy. If it were, people say, oh, it's not rocket science, eat more and, eat less and do more. And that's like telling somebody who has depression to have a nice day, right? It's just not an effective message.
Mine is more of a statement than a question, but...
Please feel free to soapbox.
Your first couple of slides about how protein does not cause kidney disease or liver disease.
Yes.
That is story of my life and my practice.
Yeah. So is it one person?
It's
and a transplant patient. Okay. Yep.
So I do kidney, do a lot of liver, and so I get patients a lot from the medical center up the road here, and so their hepatologists are telling their liver patients, do not eat any meat, particularly beef, red meats, because they worsen your liver disease.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That is not true. I have patients come to our hospital on vegetarian diets because all meat is bad. So story of my life, I'm trying to change that. Here our doctors listen to me, and they're fairly good.
Hashtag no evidence. No,
can I send them your way?
That's how it's been, is honestly, like, and some people have gotten really upset about this, and I've said, people have asked the question, I said, what's your evidence? Well, people who are in renal ward, I'm like, no, the wrong population. Absolutely, if you have renal disease, or if I'm not a physician, so I'm not going to take that away, but I mean, the main point is one doesn't cause the other. There are people with alcoholic liver disease for whom lower, particularly in aromatic amino acid diets, would be highly prudent.
I have two questions. I have an idea on the answer, but could you give examples of nutrient-dense protein, and then also meal spacing? Is that like breakfast, lunch, and 4 hours apart?
Sure. So the nutrient-dense proteins, I mean, we're talking about eggs, we're talking about dairy, we're talking about all forms of animal meat, chicken, pork, beef, etc. Those are nutrient-dense sources of protein. It's not to say that there aren't other nutrient-dense sources of protein, but usually they're the most affordable and readily available. They're ones that people are familiar with. They're also the ones that people are often told not to consume because of cholesterol. Fish, no problem with fish. The only problem with fish, and it's been a tough message to get across, and this is consumer speak, the fish is fishy. That's what they say. It's a bit fishy. I'm like, it's fish. But that's what they'll say, you know. I'm just parroting back what I hear. It's a little bit fishy. I'm like, it's fish, yeah. Absolutely, no problems with fish. But the main point is people have been told for over 30 years now, 40 years, don't eat this because it's got so much cholesterol and that's going to kill you. The dietary guidelines have finally, hallelujah, given up and said, you know what, dietary intake of cholesterol has very little bearing on your own endogenous cholesterol levels. Have an egg.
So, to piggyback on his first question, he has another question.
Yes.
What would not be a nutrient-dense source of protein? I'm an OB-GYN, so I'm here for sound bites for my patients, so...
I mean, it's not to say that plant sources of proteins are non-nutrient dense, but a lot of them, frankly, are not. You have to eat a lot more plant source protein to get the same amount and quality of protein, and most of them are not as nutrient dense. Does it mean that, vegetarian diets are bad? And no, absolutely not. But remember the answer to the question I gave in terms of times of stress, I do think that it becomes more important to talk about protein quality. So if I'm the 75-year-old lady, and I hate to invoke that story, but it's very common. I see probably at least a dozen of them a day going through my center. They eat 6 grams of protein at breakfast every day. To answer your question, yes, it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Forgot that one. And most of it comes from wheat gluten. It's not a very good quality protein. And so it's okay. We have it. It's okay to have an egg week. It will not kill you is the thing in brackets afterwards. I mean, if you got to 75 and you're doing okay, you just lost your husband and you're eating 6 grams of wheat gluten protein for breakfast, have an egg for God's sake. It's okay to have an egg, Oh, the cholesterol. I'm like, you got a lot of things to worry about other than the cholesterol or the saturated fat.